How did you know Dick Leopold? Were you in his class when you were here at Northwestern?
I took his year-long sequence, The History of American Foreign Policy, which met at the legendary hour of 8 a.m. on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and I took that sequence in 1974, 1975.
And were you one of those many students who kept in touch with Professor Leopold over the years?
Yes, one of his magical qualities, I think, is that he thought anybody who did that was special. Well, it turns out there were probably hundreds of us who thought ourselves special.
For the last 14 years, I have known best those students willing to take an 8 o'clock class. Certainly not a representative group, and indeed an endangered species. They've been a joy to teach, articulate, knowledgeable, witty, critical in their thinking, and willing to extend themselves.
What he did that I think was so interesting was that he had an ability to make you feel special. If you were in the room, you could feel like you were the only person in the room, even though you were surrounded by your discussion class of 35 people. And he had a way, he took interest and he cared.
Those who do not remember the undergraduates of the 1950s and early 1960s tend to underrate their concern for studies, for campus reforms, and for the world outside. Not all were characters in Happy Days. That is the television brainchild of Gary Marshall, whom I taught in 1954.
And he went through many times when I think he thought, well, I know he thought, because he told me, you know, what I've done hasn't really mattered here. And I know there are former students of his who, when they hear that or when they read it, will say, are you kidding me? I mean, here's a guy who had people under his wing that included George McGovern and Dick Gephardt, Gordon Siegel, the founder of Crate and Barrel, Jim Colby, the congressman, David Zarefsky, who professor and dean of the School of Speech for many years, and on and on and on. Gary Marshall, the entertainer. I mean, it's people who would just say, "You've got to be kidding me, Dick. Look at the lives." But it's sometimes very hard to see that. It's very hard to see it at the end when at least for him, none of it seems really all that important. There were several things that happened throughout his life that his former students did in a very grassroots way that honored him in ways that is extraordinary and very unusual. David Clafter, Aaron Marcoux, and I followed through on David Clafter's idea of seeing whether there would be sufficient support to actually have a Leopold professorship. But the long and the short of it is 350 people later, 350 former students later, and in October of 2006, the chair achieved the $2 million funding mark that was required to make it permanent, and it was his last public appearance. Was the event in October commemorating the permanent Richard W. Leopold chair, and it was absolutely a highlight of his life. In the end, and what I did actually for him the last day of his life, he died on Thanksgiving evening, appropriately enough, I think, for an American history professor. The 2 days before, and I finished at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Thanksgiving Day, I read to him the letters of tribute, and there had been many, many, many of them that had been submitted by his former students in connection with the commemoration of the professorship.
My chief hope for the class of 1980, I wrote, was would they reach their retirement around the year 2030, they would be able to look back on their years at Northwestern with the same sense of loyalty and the same sense of affection for the faculty, staff, and students that I feel today as I totter off the stage into what I am told are greener and calmer pastures. Thank you very much.